is October the 13th. Let me repeat that again because it's hard to believe this month is going so quick. Good evening, everybody. Today is October the 13th, 2020, and the time is now 5:32. On behalf of the Board of Education, thank you for tuning in, if you will, to our special meeting where we're going to be focused by and large on audit matters. And then we're going to shift into a discussion that's going to take place in executive session, but that will be towards the end of the meeting. So, Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers for today?
We do not. No speakers tonight.
So we have no speakers and we have no written submissions. But again, if you could just describe for folks, if they were interested, what they would do to speak and or provide a written submission.
Sure. So members of the public who are interested in speaking at or board meetings are welcome to submit by either calling the board office and submitting their name to the speakers list, or you may also email us at boardofelducation@rcsdk12.org. And signing up that way, you can also submit written submission, and we will ensure that all board members receive your comments and that they read them. And then those are also posted to our website on www.rcsdk12.org.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I forgot to mention, we're actually going to begin this meeting today with a discussion of board goals. And that discussion will be led by the chairperson of our governance committee, and that would be Commissioner Amy Malloy. Amy, are you ready to start that discussion?
Yes, I am.
Thanks.
Thank you, President White. All right, so I just wanted to preface our needed discussion this evening, just stating that Commissioner Elliott, her absence is perhaps going to delay us in moving forward this evening for a vote. So I'm hoping that instead that we can spur some discussion together for just future review. Hold on just a moment. I need to open something up here. Sorry for the delay here. I'm trying to open up two documents at once. Okay. Yeah, so due to President Elliott's emergency absence, I would suggest that we delay moving this forward for vote. Instead, I'm hoping that we can further review all of these policies and then perhaps come to a consensus by next Tuesday at our special meeting. And then hopefully we can move this forward for a vote by our October 22nd regularly scheduled business meeting. Vice President Elliott plays a crucial or critical role in the development of many of these items, especially as related to the reestablished ESA, or Excellence in Student Achievement Committee, of which she is the new chair. So in addition to tonight's feedback and the additional feedback you provide throughout the work week, I will be meeting with board staff to further clarify these goals. And I just want to provide some background to the public watching this evening. We have been working closely with Sherry Johnson from the Monroe County School Boards Association to develop clear board goals. And these board goals help provide a general roadmap on which or where we want our district to be by the year's end. So we were counseled by the Monroe County School Boards Association to develop broader goals that were actionable in that they could be measured using specific metrics or criteria. We were counseled to keep them in broader terms so as to more readily align them with our new superintendent's, well, relatively new at this point, sorry, Superintendent Myers, with our superintendent's district strategic plan. These plans provide board oversight over the district as opposed to board management of the district. It's our administration that will carry out this work. And as your board governance chair, I affirm, or I can affirm rather, that our administration is prepared to do this heavy lift on our behalf. And simply put, they are ready and able to do this work. So our goals need to be generalized metrics that are actionable, yes, that use both qualitative as well as quantitative data, and then our analysis of said data. So we established 3 core board goals for our district about a month ago. And these goals include, first and foremost, improving the district's overall financial condition. Secondly, increasing academic achievement. And then finally, our third goal, increasing equity district-wide. So these were some great goals that we came up and collaborated on together. And I was really proud that we were able to do that as a board. So kudos, board. So using some of the feedback from our governance meeting last week, I reworked some of these with board staff. One of the concerns raised by commissioners, or some of them I should say, was the need for more specific metrics on each goal, and I appreciate that. You'll notice that we reworded the goal descriptors to include some of that information, and the metrics include some of the criteria that we will use to meet these goals. For instance, analysis of graduation rates or test scores, revisits to district-wide studies, among other things. So our superintendent needs this general information from us in order to implement her strategic plan. In reviewing board goals from other districts, including the Big Five, you can easily see how generalized the board goals are, and then that they are made more specific by a reconciliation between strategic plans. It's not unusual to see these modified prior to the year's end in other districts, including Big Five districts. So I hope tonight that we can brainstorm a bit using the feedback and as well as your insight. I hope that as a board, we can come together and finalize these in order for the superintendent to better implement her vision. So the last thing I'll say before we start our discussion is that I'd just like us to consider the following as we work through this tonight. One, I hope that we can provide our superintendent with a generalized framework that can easily be aligned with her vision. We want our superintendent and her team to be set up for success. Secondly, we need to remain flexible and not rigid in this regard, given the unprecedented nature of the past 6 months, as well as the unique challenges we're facing at this time. And finally, we want to make sure that we can move forward. The school year has started and we have to remain focused on our students and their unique needs. So without further ado, I just have to switch screens here. All right. So first of all, I think you've had a chance to see some of these. And if you can just look through, I know that our board clerk sent these out. And you can see how we changed the first, just some of the descriptors for each of the goals. And I'm just wondering if I could get some general feedback about how people are feeling just in looking at this at this time. Let me go to my participation screen so I can look for hands here. I don't see any. I know I'll give you a chance to look that over. So you'll see that, for instance, whereas we before just had the goal itself listed, but we tried to make things more actionable in nature and using active verbs at the beginning to describe some of the criteria we would use for each of these goals. And Kalia, I'm looking at the participation screen, so you might have to help me with hands, etc. And I'm not seeing any. I think we do definitely need to.
I'm with you. I'm not seeing anyone participate.
Okay, thanks. So I think we changed just the wording, and I worked with the whole board staff on this. And again, we'll have all week to review this and work together to find language that we're all comfortable with. We do need to rework. Kelly, if you could scroll down to the number 2, increase academic achievement. I think this was a great example of some of the more specific metrics that some of our board members were looking for last week, which I completely agree with. For instance, like looking at specifically graduation rates, attendance rates, achievement rates. We are in a difficult position this year in that a lot of the typical ways that we assess achievement they've been disrupted here and there. So we'll have to work closely with our superintendent to help gauge this. But yeah, some of the things that you had mentioned last week, we tried to include in the descriptor. We do need to, was it the B that we asterisked? Yeah.
Yes, B, we do need to align that with the strategic plan because there are metrics. Those metrics are already determined, and so we didn't want to duplicate or to use something else.
Mm-hmm. Right, fantastic. So we'll have to perhaps reword that. And then I know for the last one, we didn't have time to completely reword the final one. So we need to discuss that one this evening as well. So I'm going to go to our participant screen. Any initial, oops, President White, I see your hand, but oops, I see several hands now, sorry. So I see Dr. Jallo. I don't know who was first. So
It should be in the order of how they appear.
Oh,
I don't have
thank
the participant screen today for some reason.
Okay, President White, go ahead.
Yeah, I did like some of the improvements. I would just ask as you continue to do this that perhaps the way to address the concerns that I and other people raised is to maybe include some kind of appendix. So in other words, as the superintendent fleshes out her specific goals. And by the way, I had to go off a few minutes ago, so you might have said this, so I apologize if I'm repeating what you've already said. That as the superintendent fleshes out his or her goals, that those be attached as an exhibit or an attachment to the more broader state. I think that's a good compromise. And I noticed that was done in 2B, and you're right, we didn't have a chance to flesh out 3, but I would ask that some reference be made to the superintendent's specific goals as an appendix. And so all those things about equity in terms of access to advanced placement courses, that sort of thing, could all be fleshed out by reference to the superintendent's specific goals. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, President White. Dr. Jallo.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I was just wondering what was meant or what was the rationale between for 3A, actually.
All right, let me take a look there. Let me just. Oh, well, this was one that we didn't have time to reword. So that was one of
the first half. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't quite hear you. Can you?
I said I understand the first half.
Mm-hmm.
But when it says approved policy changes, I'm wondering what's the connection between community partnerships and approved policy changes.
Well, we clearly need to clarify that.
It just might be me.
Yeah. Any suggestions from fellow board members on this? I know we needed that consistent oversight. I know that there had been questions about the effectiveness of some of these partnerships. So that might be one aspect of it. Let me look, I've got some more hands, it looks like. Commissioner Powell.
Instead of approved policy changes, if we're looking for alternative language, something to the effect of respond to proposed policy changes. Because it has to be proactive to the change. Any input we get from community partners and parents needs to be proactive.
Okay, thank you. Noted. And I saw Commissioner Adams. I saw your hand next.
I'm interested in knowing what wasn't clear about our legislative agenda. For C.
That might very well be totally clear. It's up for us to decide, whether or not we want to keep that in and if that's sufficient the way it's written. Yeah. I don't know if anyone brought that up as a concern last time. Callie, do you happen to remember if that was one of the concerns raised?
No, we just moved it down from, it was originally a fiscal goal. And so the suggestion was to move it into an equity goal. I don't think anyone had any issues with the metric itself, that we would develop a clear legislative agenda and that we would advocate at all the levels for funding. I think that one is pretty standard.
Fantastic.
I do appreciate seeing it move down to the goal number 3, but and I think the phrase clearer, Commissioner Adams has a really good point. I think what it should read is developing a legislative agenda annually, because we do have to review it annually, and advocate. But I think the larger point here is the advocacy work. I almost wish we could flip them because advocacy kind of loses its oomph when it's got something else in front of it like that.
Okay, would you suggest perhaps saying advocating at all levels, like to start the sentence instead?
Well, okay, given permission to consider different options, how about advocating for annually developed legislative agenda and then keep everything at after advocate so that finishes at all levels for adequate funding.
Okay.
Or advocate at all levels for adequate funding using annually developed legislative agenda.
Okay. All right. So what I'll do is I'll add that as a possible edit for people to look through once I get a chance to sit down with the board staff. And we can propose some of those changes then and show the tracking of those changes. I'm just going to go back to my participant screen. Commissioner Adams, was that an old hand or?
No, it's not an old hand.
Oh, okay.
So what would be suffice for me would just to change the word clearer to clear.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
Okay.
All right. And I think next steps too is in addition to kind of rewording this, I do want to have an opportunity to meet with Dr. Jallo as well as with the administration for any other guidance that they could perhaps provide. I do know that, you know, so much of this is dependent on, oops. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to scroll up. Can you scroll up, Kalia? I'm so sorry. I think the one that we needed to reword, number 2B, that's where, before I say anything else, I think we need to perhaps, if there's any additional comment on that, that's what we needed a lot of guidance on. And that's where Vice President Elliott is needed as well as as the chair of our ESSA committee, Excellence in Student Achievement. So obviously I need to seek her input as well.
I do, I'm wondering if Superintendent Marsmall would help us with this one, only because there should be metrics in the strategic plan and also in her superintendent's goals that might help us align closer.
I would agree that last time when we discussed it, that was one of the things that as commissioners we're discussing more definitiveness, that would be an area where we could provide some more substance. And maybe as President White said, this could go in the appendix or something like that to see particular sections of the strategic plan.
All right. All right, are there any more comments then at this time? As I have this feedback, we'll send out a revised draft to everyone. We certainly need to have further discussion. Is that a hand raised, President White, or just clapping?
No, I was clapping to Ricardo's comment about the clarity that said that I think it was paragraph 3. Yeah, just saying develop a clear legislative agenda.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, without further ado, I think that we are in a better position, somewhat better position. Let me take these edits under consideration with board staff, and then I'll meet with a few more people, and I'll make sure that you get a draft out prior to next Tuesday so that we can go over and hopefully approve these so that it can be more thoroughly aligned with Leslie's strategic plan. And with that, I pass the gavel back over to President White.
I'm going to throw it right over to Commissioner Powell. She chairs our audit committee. Commissioner Powell.
Hey, okay. As usual, audit committee is generally the purview of our auditor general, and she does most of the talking, but a couple of housekeeping things before that. the May 19th Audit Committee meeting. Minutes were already approved along with the June 9th Finance Committee minutes because they occurred on the same time, back to back. The CAFR is, well, the external auditors are underway in their work. We anticipate they'll be done mid-November. Our next scheduled meeting of the audit committee is December 8th, and we will most certainly review the CAFR with Fried Massick and review the results of the audit then. Okay, so having covered those bases, Anissa, do you want to take the show for your audit work?
Great. So my first item, actually, I would just provide an update on the external audit status. So they are moving along at a fine pace, I would have to say. We started maybe about a week or so later than we normally do. It was completely remote, the way we did the audit this year. Our financial audit is near completion, and on the positive side, there are currently no management comments, which means there were no audit related findings that they are considering at this point for our financial information. So that's actually very good news. The one piece that they haven't yet finished reviewing and providing an opinion on would be our student activity or extracurricular. And so as you recall, annually, we generally don't get a clean opinion in that area. It's due to the difficulty associated with all of the school-based activity funds, the students keeping the books, the various advisors being the financial liaison for those things. And so we've always had some difficulty and very few people are able to get a clean opinion, even though we have done some very positive things in the finance organization, such as centralized accounting and facilitating the reconciliations. We still struggle in that area when it gets to cash receipts and cash receipts and disbursements when you're dealing with the school building level. So while there's been a lot of change in that area, we still are probably not going to be able to get a clean opinion for the student activity extracurricular section, but it appears as though the regular financial audit is doing well. When I did have an update, I did not hear anything extra on single audit. And so that would be for the federal funds. So it sounds like the audit is going quite well. The financial schedules that I did upload do not require a resolution or anything. There are selected financial schedules that we provide to the city of Rochester. So as you're aware, we are a component unit of the City of Rochester's financials. So when they deliver their CAFR, there's actually a column that says Rochester City School District. And so that information means we need to give them financial information to load in their financials for them to finish their financial statements. So normally we call those the city schedules, and that was included in my memo to you. And those financial schedules would have been audited by our external auditor. They would have been reviewed and they would be somewhat comfortable with those numbers. Even though they're not completely signed off on our books, they're comfortable with those particular schedules to allow the city of Rochester to include them in their financial statements so that they can continue on and complete their financial audit as well. So there are no key concerns. There's one small thing. There was a financial, an update in kind of a presentation item that was there. So there might be a minor adjustment or a minor change, which would truly be something that would be a material, be not in the millions, it would be well under $1 million, which means it's not going to be significantly material, but we might need to change a classification of how some liabilities are presented on our financial statements. Nevertheless, the pages of financials, I usually inform the audit committee that those are going over to the city. I usually get in writing from our external auditor that they're comfortable with those financial records. And then we send them over to the city. And the reason why we have developed this process over the years is a very long time ago, there was some concern where we sent numbers over to the city of Rochester on their due date. And unfortunately, the auditors weren't done with the numbers, which caused double work at the city. And so politically, it was a bit of an issue. So we actually had added this extra step where there's even a conversation, we make the audit committee aware, and we get something from our external auditors saying they're comfortable. Again, I will note, we have the same external auditor as the city because we do an RFP that's intermunicipal so that both sets of books are audited by the same firm. And that makes it really easy so that when we have a team in Rochester at the city school district and there's another team at the city of Rochester, they're comfortable using each other's work because they're not worried about some third-party firm and they're not comfortable with their standards or how they do business. So for that reason, it's efficient, it saves money, etc. That's the reason why we use the same firm. And for that reason, I just want to let you know. So those city schedules are due to be at the city of Rochester on Thursday, and we will be forwarding those schedules. What you will see, and where the board will talk a little more about the CAFR, is when we finally get our draft CAFR. Normally that happens, of course, in mid-November, and that would be after there is the full financial statement audit completed. Please note the CAFR is performed by our accounting department, not the external audit firm. The external audit firm is auditing the financial records inside, so the statements, the notes, etc. And that will be coming to the board sometime in November for our final review so that we can publish our annual CAFR. And as we usually do, we will be reviewing, my team will be reviewing that CAFR and asking any questions. And the board will also have an opportunity to ask any questions necessary as it relates to the CAFR, but that'll be your best view of financials as a whole. You don't really have enough information to really ask all your questions looking at these various schedules, but it'll be more comprehensive because there'll be a lot more text and descriptions in there. Are there any questions on those city schedules? Having none, I will move forward and move into the next area. So those will be available to go to the city after whatever adjustments are necessary. The next area that I would like to touch bases on is we are continuing to do some work in the capital assets area, in fixed assets, as well as the capital projects area, dealing with our H&K fund, doing some audit work there. We're trying to wrap up that work. We recognize that the SIP is on agenda for the board this Thursday. So we'll see how much that learning is there too, but we'll also then in our next meeting likely present whatever findings there are as it relates to the capital and fixed asset audit work that my team is performing. The other thing that you need to be aware of is normally every year we do perform student activity work. And this year with the schools not being open right now, it's not very clear that we're going to be able to do any of that work. That'll have to depend upon how they determine if it's going to make sense for the clubs, et cetera, to move forward and to see if that work does take place in the school building. So we may not be able to do some of that work because there may not be enough activity. That is what posed a question and a challenge this year also, because we shut down right when most of the activity takes place towards the end of the year. So that is yet another challenge as it relates to that. The first audit I would like to talk about is our building safety audit. Under the building safety audit, there's been a lot of work done in the Office of Safety and Security, and that falls under our Chief of Operations, Mike Schmidt. He has a great team in there. They are a wonderful resource, and really they have a coordinator with a wealth of knowledge and experience that is inside of that shop. So they've done some things to put forward to make sure we have good, safe practices. The state has issued guidance as it relates to some of those practices that need to take place. And it really wants to make sure that across the state, school districts have like a building safety plan, they have procedures for dealing with any type of emergency event, et cetera. And so that is a lot of guidance coming out of the state, and the safety team, the safety department is doing a really good job at trying to get the information, push it out, trying to standardize some of the things that need to happen. One of the things, as you're aware, we are now compliant with a district-wide safety team. Vice President Audit sits on it as a board member, and I do as a board staff member. And they do have a cross-functional team. We had several meetings this year already. We put forth an updated safety plan, and that was voted on by the board back in September. So we are now compliant with the district-wide safety plan requirement. The part that gets a little more challenging is then the school building-based plans. The state has a certain format and template that they like to have go out, and every building is required to have their own team and have their own plan and have different partners, community partners, et cetera, to be on that team, such as police or fire or some local community people. And the importance of that is to make sure that all things are considered, and in an emergency, we would have the right players all at the table. And so I know our buildings have had some difficulty really reaching some of the external partners and external members, and that is something that they're going to be working towards, and the safety department is going to help with that. And we just want to make sure that we get to full level of compliance. And there was a state report that was issued by the Office of the State Comptroller back in 2019. That report had a lot of different findings that they were concerned about just general compliance from a safety perspective. And so the challenge with that is we've noticed that the state has adjusted some things, even as we've done submissions and other information like that, to require or be a little more specific about their requirements as the plans go forward. Annually, every building must put forward a safety plan for their building. It gets uploaded to the state site. There's now a wonderful process where they are able to have the police, they can actually access those sites. So we're dealing with something like building plans and things such as that to help in a case of emergency. So that's really wonderful. So the real need in the area of safety, as we are doing good work in that area, is really making sure buildings internalize these standards and make sure that they're prepared to both comply with the state requirements as well as have an operational plan in the event of an emergency. So while we're uploading things on the state website, it shouldn't be just a rote process where, yes, I've complied and now I'm moving on. This is critically important. This is safety. Let's make sure that the buildings really have functional plans and they have all of the requirements met. And we want to make sure that the district is offering guidance in a clear and straightforward fashion so that the buildings can readily comply with those things. Outside of that, we really want to make sure that we're a little clearer with drills that have to happen and the various manners in which drills must occur. They could be having alternate exits, or when something is blocked, or they have multiple ways in which our drills take place. So we're looking for monitoring processes that'll be built in by our safety and security department. And those monitoring processes will then be shared with our school chiefs and teaching and learning organization to identify when we have compliance concerns. And then in those cases, when we do have a compliance concern, it'll afford an opportunity for there to be support from the chief level if necessary, and ensure that we are actually watching to verify that the compliance is there. So that is kind of the highlights. I think they're going to need some level of support to make sure that, you know, as we have the guidance about what's required from a safety standpoint, we also need to make sure then we're engaging and reporting saying, hey, we have a problem over here. Can you support this building if there's an area they don't comply with? Outside of that, that in spirit is generally what's going on the safety audit. I think hats off, Chuck Cutler has been a main contact for us in that area, and he has been a great resource and really ambitious about reaching out to the state, trying to get support, seeing what things have changed to make sure he's ahead of the curve, and he's really looking forward to some of the improvements that need to be made here. So that is pretty much it for the safety work. I would like to move into, are there questions on safety? Okay. I will move on to textbook management follow-up, and let me start off with that one. So I do want to be clear, this is the textbook management follow-up in our last audit committee. If the board recalls, we had some follow-up from the last administration, and what had happened is when it was time to approve, the board's concern was, hey, wait, all those people aren't here right now. How can we accept this report when there's been so much change? In this report from that time, I had standing bi-weekly meetings with Dr. Colleen Sadowski, who has been really very much a champion in this process. The textbook function rolls up to her, although she is the Director of Library and Media Services. And so I've been working with her. And we've been meeting and going through the recommendations and see what work needs to be done in some of the areas and talking through some of the concerns and really trying to roll forward the work that has been going on in this practice. Now, the one challenge, of course, is this is older, it's still an existing problem, but the work that was done mainly here was done before this current administration. So while they sit here and they kind of, you know, it was rather unfortunate because, you know, my first introduction even to Dr. Janelle Morris and also to Dr. Black was, you know, hello, my name's Anissa, this is, you know, I'm from the audit department, and then say, I'm very sorry, but I have this not so nice gift for you. So, you know, identifying they just got here and we kind of happened to on them with an audit report with a lot of work that hasn't been addressed in some time that really does need a lot of attention. So one thing, I did provide you with a draft of what the potential document is, and I did want to just state clearly, I am notating the front cover of that report to really identify the current administration are the people trying to fix the problems, but it happened before they got here. So it's not like under their watch, all of these challenges happened. I do also want to state, I'm sure the board is aware of some of the historical problems we've had in this particular textbook area. And we're really hoping that we can probably figure out and get ahead of the curve on what is it that we urgently need to address at this point, and what is the time frame that is going to work. But as we talk about the positive things that are happening, even in a textbook area, I've got to mention there's Vicki Griffin, the textbook coordinator who works tirelessly, just tirelessly to do whatever it takes to move the textbook agenda forward. So I do want to say that because I can't believe the number of things that this one person does to move just textbooks in general. She's in all the buildings, she's in the warehouse, she's ordering, she's connecting with private parochial. It's one person, and it's unfortunate that one person's doing so many things, because in an organization this big, we really need to identify what all the roles need to be to make us successful as a whole. And that's been one of our challenges. We haven't really stepped forward and said, who does what where, when the organization decided to eliminate the textbook coordinators that used to be in the textbook clerks that used to be in all the buildings. So with that change, it's very interesting, because when I speak of Vicki, she has gone through the ranks and she will do whatever it takes that needs to be done, whether or not there are other people working, she's working. And so if I even look back over the years, I can think of one distribution that happened one summer in the 11th hour. She works with our city workers. She worked with our students who were out of the Edison program and trained them up. She had a summer group of student helpers. I threw my kids in too, just because I called it community service and made them work for free. But all the same, we needed the work to get done, and everyone was willing to pitch in and make sure the books would get delivered as they needed to. So I do not want it to appear as though there's not a glimmer of people working hard in this area. It's just from a high level perspective, we really need to decide where we're going and what we need to do in this area. So we've historically not put a lot of funding behind the textbooks. We've generally tried to use the textbook aid, around a $2 million budget annually, to support whatever the books are that were needed. And I think it's just been several years of what is our focus and how do we need to move forward with textbooks. And I think the big push right now is really giving our current or our new administration an opportunity to look at where we're at and really come up with an active game plan going forward on addressing this particular issue. But there is certainly a lot of opportunities. We want to make sure we're evaluating core subjects. We're really looking at all the materials that our students are getting. We want to make sure that it's very clear who does what where, so that when something's purchased, we're clear. We have a real opportunity with inventory controls for our textbooks, because if we're not actively inventorying our distribution site, and if the schools don't have an active and current and correct inventory, then how do we know that we're buying the right things, or if that we need to buy, or could we possibly shift from building to building? So there could be a monetary opportunity to be a little bit more efficient as it relates to textbooks. Are there any significant questions surrounding? Yes, Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you. I raised my hand on the side, but I don't know who's monitoring that right now, because I know you're talking. But I want to first thank you for mentioning Vicki, because I do think she is a superstar in the district and certainly around textbooks. And that was actually one of the notes I wrote for myself on the draft report you sent regarding textbooks, the audit, was that I didn't see her name. And my concern is that there is a new administration, and I get that. And there's a lot of leadership that are named in terms of the team that will direct each or address each of the things that you pointed out here. But I am making a request that she be included in all of textbook related audit matters, because I don't think there's anybody in this district that knows that system, that has worked every facet of it the way that Vicki has. And my concern is not that our leadership and administration are incapable, but that we often leave direct service providers out of the problem solving and the conversation. And they're the ones who are literally doing the work and have done the work and have created systems and worked around systems. And so I would be amiss if I did not advocate for Vicki to be a part of those conversations and at the table with administration and leadership, And I know that she has a person she reports to who's also knowledgeable. But again, it is not the same as being the person who has like championed and held textbooks distribution on their shoulders solely. The second piece that I just want to bring up is also, I know that Vicki in the past has also utilized student workers in some of this work and have provided some leadership opportunities for some of the students at Edison. And I would like for us to figure out a way how to formally support that moving forward so that she has those student supports in place and they're given an opportunity to earn some dollars, some leadership, and some experience, some work experience, while being able to do so before and after school. If we can figure out a way to make that a permanent thing, I'm up for that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Superintendent.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to second what Commissioner LeBron said relative to Vicki. I know her from my previous role, and she was actually talking us through in my previous district about textbooks and her process. She's like spot on when it comes to understanding the process, and she does an inordinate amount of work. So I think she is a critical stakeholder that we need to have work through and help us with this. But I do know firsthand her work and just wanted to reaffirm that. That's important.
Commissioner LeBron, did you re-raise your hand or did that just finally show me that you raised your hand?
I think it just showed you and I took it off so that you didn't think I re-raised my hand.
Okay. So yeah, so naturally, I brought up Vicki. I actually had a lengthy conversation even with Vicki. And like I said, when my kids were not being paid, I had them doing it. And it's funny because I actually went to my daughter and said, hey, what about other people on your team? I'm sure you all need to do community service. So I was just grabbing free kids to come ahead and haul books to classrooms because I was like, why not? But it was wonderful when we did have summer workers. We did pull in on them. I know it wasn't budgeted this year, but I was really, really touched by the hard work she did do with the Edison program. And those kids knew what they were doing. They were solid, they were trained. And while that's not in place right now, that was a wonderful work. In no way was there ever a desire or an expectation to exclude Vicki. I actually both talked with her. Dr. Colleen Sadowski is Vicki's direct supervisor. And so I've been putting one over one and we've had multiple conversations. And even as we've walked through this process, yes, this couldn't be done without Vicki, not a question about that. So it was just not putting even more names on the report. So that was really what was behind it. But absolutely, I've been talking with Vicki and had a lengthy conversation with her. I think it was even Friday as we talked about textbooks and some of the challenges, and really do believe she will be integral in some of the solutions because not only does she have a great understanding of the textbook piece, but really how it impacts and she can tell you things about curriculum that's at the district and some of these other challenges that have come from. So even when we sometimes adopt district-wide curriculum and she sees change differences happening in different buildings and hears directly from teachers. And I think that is a piece that we really must consider as we look at the overhaul in this particular area. Are there any other questions related to textbook? Great. I'll move on to the next. Van, you came in? Did you have a question? Okay. The next area. I'm sorry, Van, go ahead.
I'm just shaking my head no.
Okay, wonderful. The next one is under professional service
I'm
contract.
sorry, Nissa, I do have a quick question. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
sure.
Perhaps I missed this, but can you report how many digital textbooks that we're using by any chance?
I did not record the digital textbooks. I know that there are some, and I had a lengthy conversation about this with Dr. Colleen Sadowski, which I don't think she's on, but I can certainly send back to you all the number of digital textbooks. I know that that is one of the things we are using right now where it makes it a little convenient to allow a read across the district where you're not moving physical books. Right. So I can certainly get that back to you. I don't want to fall outside of your process as far as how, so I'll coordinate with Kalia to make sure that I'm allowed to either just give you the information or send it back through the log, but I will let you know how many digital textbooks. And you're really talking about reading like novels as well, correct?
Well, anything, primarily textbooks though, not necessarily novels. Those aren't.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's more where we're seeing the widespread use of digitized material. But I am very interested in just a cost analysis at some point, just a comparison, especially when we think about the number of books that get returned or don't get returned every year, and the impact that that has, and whether or not a digital textbook or edition would help us save on costs.
And so that is actually a very good point as it relates to that. And one of the things that did come back to this administration, the prior administration had made the decision that we weren't going to be logging textbooks or barcoding on an individual student level. And instead, we were looking at barcoding at maybe a teacher level for copies per student, or finding a more efficient way to do it. Unfortunately, the current system we had wasn't hugely efficient. And at the time administration made the decision we were not going to do the barcoding, we were in the middle of the bilingual adoption. And unfortunately, those books had come so late in August. If we had individually scanned those books to students, we would not have gotten them in the schools in time. So I am well aware of why that decision was made at that point in time. And I think once we get to the point of really identifying who does what in the textbook process, and really clearly identify what are building-based responsibilities, what are your subject matter experts or your academic leaders, like your ELA leader or your math leader or your science leader, what are they saying as their directors of those different disciplines? And then what is it that the distribution center does where the books are? And what does it that, say, Vicki and the textbook function does? And so when we're a little more clear on that, I think we'll probably be closer to what we can truly achieve. And how we can go about achieving things. But right now, I think there's just some time and attention. And it's rather unfortunate because the new team came in probably not even expecting to deal with books. And here's this thing sitting in front of us. And it's probably more of a symptom of a problem that we have that they probably meant to fix. So we'll have to give them an opportunity to really get their arms around what's there. And then we'll be able to go further. But I will absolutely put that log that question as it relates to digital media, unless someone else knows the answer to that question. I don't know if Dr. Myers knows offhand that information. No. So I will get back to you with that as a response.
Thank you, Anissa.
Thank you. Go ahead, Willa.
On that, Anissa, I know that a number of exceptions to typical copyright rules are in play during the whole COVID thing. And I know that's not part of your audit. So perhaps as a question log item, perhaps the administration could just put together a one-page high-level overview of how textbook material is getting into the hands of our students in this remote environment. You know, what copyright exceptions have been granted? Are the students accessing, you know, scanned portions of, you know, chapters of textbooks, you know, just as a baseline, for baseline understanding for board members? Is that something you could do, Madam Superintendent?
Sorry, it's trying to click unmute. Yeah, I think that's something that we could provide. If Kalia would just make sure we have that noted and we can look at it.
It doesn't have to be complicated. Just, you know, as I say, baseline. Some of us have kids, and you know, and are watching them working on their computers, but don't necessarily have a clue what my son has access to and what he doesn't, you know.
Okay.
Okay.
To that end, sorry if I could just jump in one more time. Sorry, I'm Miss Teacher here. Yeah, to that end, I think that if we're maybe walked through as a board the textbook approval process that the district employs in general would be extremely helpful, and where we're at on the textbook approval process for, you know, building by building as part of that, just so that we know when textbooks are up for renewal, you know, that way that should the need arise, we can phase out printed textbooks. And I know I'm using an online textbook for the first time this year with my 9th and 10th graders, and the resources, I mean, the costs are usually quite comparable, but, you know, so we're looking at cost savings on the one hand, but also looking at the many resources available to students through the online textbook opportunities. So yeah, just walking everyone through that whole process would be helpful. I know it would be super helpful for me. Thank you.
I just want to add to that point, though, one of the items in here is them getting their arms around the various curriculum in the various areas. So I don't know, I'm not trying to speak for Dr. Myers-Small here, but it might take a little bit of time where it might be easier to answer the question, what they're doing now versus the walkthrough of that process. That's one of the items that is a little bit more a robust process, but it was one of the areas that we had listed for a recommendation to really get their arms around that. So while I'm not trying to speak for our superintendent, I am just mentioning that might take a little bit of time so they can get their arms around the entire process, since most of the leaders in this area are new. But I will defer to you, Dr. Myers-Small.
I think I'd have to defer to Dr. Morris. I don't know if there's a quick answer that you have now relative to that.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. As you've heard already, we, Dr. Black and I, have only recently received this audit, and it is extensive. And so with that in mind, there are several, if not almost all of the major core areas that require a textbook adoption. And so therefore, that will take a very long time. In most cases, it usually takes years to adopt textbooks. So we are certainly up for the task, Dr. Black and I, but we are just going through the process to find out what the process is. We know that there are at least 24 textbooks that need to be, the curriculum need to be adopted through the textbooks. And therefore that will take a significant amount of time and a significant amount of resources and money. And so we would just ask that you give us an opportunity to find out just what the formal process is here, but it will take time. And I'm sure all of us in the board and in the district will be involved in several textbook adoptions very shortly. So that would be my answer for now. Most of these books have not been adopted in years. So it will be a long-term process that we will be working on.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Powell?
When Anissa and I met before this meeting, we talked about this aspect of, what's the schedule for evaluating replacement textbooks and new adoptions, and saw just how lacking in detail that is. So, the phrase, we're from the government, we're here to help, comes to mind, until that it is called to people's attention that there's no matrix that includes every grade level, every subject. And we're not even, just shows we're not even keeping track of what needs to be considered for district-wide adoption, and then balance that with the budget that we get, to support a district-wide adoption. So, this was an important report to get into the superintendent's hands and get her to respond to, because it's kind of the underpinnings of all good teaching, right?
So thank you so much for that. And like I said, I do think I'm very encouraged with the new leaders that are here. They were open enough to at least accept the meeting, where it's kind of like first introduction. So nice to meet you. Here's this great big problem that belongs to you. And they didn't shut me down quickly on that one. So I greatly appreciate both Dr. Morris and Dr. Black saying, hey, it is what it is. It's a gift. We'll deal with it. Let's try to fix this issue. So while I know it's mortifying to see yourself attached to such a report, and that's why I just want to make sure that I am noting on the face of the report as well as in the conclusion, these people listed in the report are just the the lucky people who happen to be here as we're doing this work, and not necessarily the individuals who are a part of this particular problem. They just get to be part of the solution. So I am putting the disclaimer both on the cover of the report and in the conclusion, because I guess I was looking at it like, wow, I guess if I got here and got such a present, I would probably be passing out myself. So they have been very, very good. And I'm very encouraged that the 2 leaders we do have here over this area stepped up and said, oh yeah, no, this is a problem. And so we really just have to figure out how it is that we're going to work towards this problem. And it's not an easy, simple 2-minute thing. It is going to take some time and effort. It's a lift. And unfortunately, it just hasn't been addressed in so long. It just makes it that much bigger, that great big rock rolling down the hill, and it's moving at a very fast speed. So that is what that one is. And thank you all for your support. Dr. Myers-Small, did you have something?
Yeah, if you would just, I think there are a couple key things here. As you said, it's been such a long time. We need to just try and figure out how the process happened before, right? Just to see what that rotation schedule was, who was involved on the committees, et cetera, if there were committees, like what exactly is or was the process in Rochester. And then the other piece, though, that, and Dr. Morris and I talked about this in our one-on-one today, is that just taking a look at what other places do to see how that either aligns or doesn't, and to make the process as manageable as possible. But we know that we've had major shifts in just what New York State has articulated. You know, we have the Regents Reform Agenda with Common Core, and now we have the Next Generation Standards. So this is, I don't want to say yo person's work, yo person's work. Say it again.
Yo lady.
Oh, yo lady. I love it. But this is,
one should know that the term yeoman is a specific job description. It's not a policeman where you can substitute the man.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like yo people, yo person, yo lady. But I'm grateful that when we did talk about it, as you said, Anissa, that it was just like, okay, this is something that we need to tackle. It's going to take some time, but we'll move forward and we'll address it. And I feel very confident in Dr. Morris and Dr. Black leading this and gathering the necessary team, including Vicki, to move this forward. So I'm encouraged.
Thank you. Okay, I will move on to professional service contracts. So as it relates to, I'm sorry, Commissioner LeBron, are you trying to speak? Okay.
No, my favorite. I'm ready for this one.
Okay, I figured you would be. Oh, joy. You were waiting for something. I just knew it. So our challenge within professional service contract, let me set back. We actually do have a lot of control built into our system to kind of force workflow in certain areas and to make sure various individuals are involved in the contract relationship. The challenge, though, around that is just the pure volume that is happening at the district. When you start including facilities, some of the IT renewals, et cetera, along with all of the other professional services going through the legal department, is the volume becomes really high. So at some prior time, it was then determined that certain IT renewals, as well as some facilities type services, and I don't want to misspeak, but something on specific types of security services in facilities, there were templates created to allow some of those items to go through those departments and not necessarily go through the contracts attorney that we have on staff. What I can say about our contracts function is, one, the team themselves are great people who actually go beyond to try to really just make things happen. They're there trying to support and assist and get the organization as a whole, as they're looking for contractual relationships, to where they need to be. So instead of being, say, contract Nazis, nope, wrong papers, I reject you, they really are trying to work with people when there's missing information and trying to at least get from individuals what they're looking for. The challenge in that, of course, is that when they're in a position of trying to create contracts for so many different functions, for so many different things, they don't know what they don't know unless they're shared with it. So some of the things we're really looking for within this function is really being a little more clear about what data has to go forward, how much scrutiny is there in that process, and ensuring that it really is an appropriate business resource. Now, one thing we have been working in, and some of the work that has gone on with the contracts audit in particular, is with the addition of Dr. Jallo and the requirement for her to report on contracts. We had several different meetings with our contracts attorney, Adrian Neal, to just work through all of the different ways that we want to make sure there's visibility and oversight as it relates to the contracts. So we have worked in and we have updated. One of the recommendations and one of the questions that Dr. Jallo kept asking as we went through this process was, okay, I hear what's wrong. Is it will or is it skill? What's going on? Why isn't this working in some of these areas? And that was a really key item as it relates to that. And as we look at, and I know for now me, I said, oh, I'm gonna have to borrow that from somewhere. Is it will or is it skill? Why isn't this working in different areas that we're looking at? So within the contracts process, one thing that we've added was a contracts checklist. My team created a checklist to identify, because the question is, does everyone know what they're supposed to be doing? And if everyone doesn't know what they're supposed to be doing, then is it possible someone signs off saying, yep, I saw it, but they don't know what they're supposed to be looking at? So we've created a one-pager, and it identifies the requisitioner. Here are the things the requisitioner must do, must have attached. This is what the supervisor needs to do. This is what, and we went down the list, the last reviewer being the CFO. And adding this checklist, so to speak, and it's similar to the work that I tried to do with the P cards, our team, when we created the green cards running around the district, and we did the P card series, and we handed out cardboard, bright colored cards, identifying the steps that needed to be followed for people who were submitting P cards, and try to do some education. Likewise, with this contracts process, we're hoping, and we've got feedback from Adrian Neal, who is the contracts attorney, to say, yes, this covers what our various needs are. They've always been wonderful about providing annual training to the people who are putting forth contracts, but this also is a reminder card so that as it goes in, we're hoping to improve the quality of information that's being received so that the process can work a little bit better. So I did want to add that that is something that we're adding to this particular process. In addition to, there is now a review by Dr. Jallo that does take place, so that as contracts are coming through, there's an extra set of eyes on those contracts. And so that is also an extra control that's put in place. But when we look at the contracts process, despite the fact that there were some controls written in there, we're saying, why are things going wrong? What's really happening? One was increasing the level of scrutiny so that everybody's not getting a contract for every purpose. But also the secondary point is, let's get to the payment of contracts and following our procedures. We have something called a direct payment list. There are items that don't necessarily have to have a contract. Sometimes they do, but we want to make sure that we're not allowing, when we go to a direct payment, we don't follow our purchase order process. And if we don't follow our purchase order process, we're not encumbering funds, so the funds aren't set aside, and then we get oopsies on the end of the day saying, hey, wait, we got to pay money for that? What's going on? So one of the things we want to do is make sure we greatly manage that direct payment process to ensure that there's proper scrutiny that is existing there. The other piece I want to bring up is, with the board's claims auditor that exists right now, it is remote. They're relying on the documentation in the files, and it's black and white. It's not like they're in the building, they're asking at a one at a time basis. They're out of town. So they're sitting there looking at our various payments. If a payment comes through, they can't see the contract, they can't see details, they don't know what they're paying for, it's gonna get held up. They're saying, I need more support, I need more documentation, I need more information. So that is one control that the board has in place now that is working very effectively to deal with that particular problem. They're identifying the length of time that some of these invoices are outstanding or if something is missing. So that actually is a control that's working as it should right now. And I just wanted to add that point, being very, very helpful in the contract process. The other little thing that I've seen, or one of the big concerns that I've had, is we've had centralized contracts, and there's a team working together to say, if I have a contract and it's for $1 million and every board member gets to use this service for $1 million, well, if I'm paying the bill and the bill comes to me, but you guys are using the service, how can I be sure that Commissioner LeBron got her portion and everything that she needed before I allowed that check to go out? How can I be sure that Commissioner Powell also got everything she needed? So we're trying to tighten down that process when we have a decentralized situation where services are decentralized, but billing is centralized. We're trying to ensure that how are you verifying that all services were received as required? Another gap that was observed, though, is also when you start dealing with, and I know one of the items that even came up with Commissioner LeBron being a request saying, hey, wait a minute, what happened to NEED and this other organizations when they had these fraudulent charges? What's happening, and could that happen to us? And as we had done this work, we had already been considering what are the problems that could have allowed such a thing to happen to us, or do we have controls in place to ensure that we don't have those types of problems? And one of our problems is that decentralized or centralized billing. If the documentation's not with the bill, if we can't prove all the services were received, how do we know they were received? The other challenge we had is after the fact, a year or 2 years down the road, we have so much turnover with our staff, with our teachers, with our buildings, et cetera. If the support is with a person and they move to another role, it's very difficult to come up with any documentation to support anything. And so we have to make sure that our records are complete. We're uploading all of the support necessary. When it's time to pay the bill, we need to have detailed and accurate and complete information so that at any point in time, if we look back, what happened last year, let me pull that and I have all the necessary support. So that is one of the other things that we're really looking for to make sure our documentation is sound. And the finance team has stepped up to say, we're going to make sure that if it gets to accounts payable and the bill doesn't have detail, it's going back to sender. We need to know exactly what happened. And we're also then expecting the individuals throughout the organization to provide the adequate support so it's crystal clear that all services were received and our records are more complete. Outside of that, outside of documentation, which was one big factor, and centralized receipt being the other big factor, those were probably the bigger issues, but we're also hoping for some additional monitoring to go inside of the process. We know that the board is expecting the $35,000 and above reports to come. And, you know, as we look at or consider, and let me just pause because I see that Commissioner LeBron has her hand up. Is that old? Do you still have a question?
I have a couple of questions on this particular audit, but I was going to let you finish in this.
Okay, all right, no problem. So I'm just about done. So, you know, as it relates to that work and what's happening, we just want to make sure that our systems are tight and that we're able to ensure that we pay vendors when work is completed, and we ensure that there's not billing. We just take the whole bill and divide it by a number and it's not clear what work happened. And we're really, you know, providing support necessary to ensure that when our district monies are paid for services, they're indeed completed. I'm all set. Go ahead, Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you. I do like the concept of a checklist. I know in some organizations, in order to get a professional service contract through, it does require, let's say I wanted to hire a vendor, I would have to get the signature of my supervisor, and then the next person up could be the financial department, and then our president, and then there's the checklist and the signatures to ensure that I went through all the necessary steps before a check is written and a contract is generated for that person to do the work. So yes, this was one of the audits that I took my time and read thoroughly, primarily because I have issues with professional service contracts in the district and have had them for a couple of years now. So a couple of things. The first one, you know, I do want to acknowledge in the report here that 31.5 million and 29.8 million, which is what we spent in 2017-18 and 2018-19, and that significant number, especially when we're talking about contracts that start at $35,000 and up, and they start to accumulate, and now we're into the millions. And so it's one of the reasons why I do want to bring back to this board their attention of needing to change our current policy on the $35,000 threshold mark that we have. I think it leads to some injustices in how we spend dollars. And I'm glad that you mentioned the NEED contract, particularly because that is one of those contracts where if you read it and you try to get information like I asked you to do, Anissa, in terms of I want to see how many families participated. What did they actually get on it? Where was the data from what we were paying all this money for, and nothing could be really produced. And because some of the folks had transitioned over, there was just no way to even track that information. And that to me is maddening. If we're paying any amount of money, and these contracts were $75,000 respectively, and then twice, we should have an idea of what we're getting for our money and evidence of the outcomes that it produced. And that is one of the biggest issues I have with all our professional services contracts. Some of them are great about producing evidence and can show us the work, and people can speak and say, this is what I've learned, these are the trainings I've gone through. And others, there's no evidence that anything viable came out of the money that we spent in this district. I did have a question on the recommendation pieces, particularly, I don't know if you want me to read it by page or just ask the question.
Go ahead and ask the question.
Okay. One of them was in relations to how the contracts are coded and how sometimes certain codes, it's on page 4 if someone wants to pull it up, but how some contracts are coded and then kicked to legal for a process, but then others are not coded in the exact same way and therefore are not seen by legal. And it's almost like we distinctively have two different systems and processes for contracts. And so it depends on who gets it, who sees it, who codes it, will depend on whether legal has eyes on it or doesn't have eyes on it. So I was a little confused as to who's coding and why they can't all go through a process where legal is seeing them as well. And so that wasn't part of the recommendation, but it was part of the observation. So just, I don't know if you want me to start there and stop.
So I can clarify. So the coding is dependent upon what type of budgetary line it's going to hit. That's what's causing the information to route in a certain manner. So it's possible, and I can't remember those two codes offhand, which the exact number, but there's like a professional service code. And so that's how we would know generally where that should be coded or where that would be routed to legal. But intentionally, these are the other two items would not hit the professional service code because say it's just software renewal. So it'd be a different line item. So it's not set up to go to see the legal department potentially. And so although you can't say we know what we don't know what we don't know is kind of the concern as it relates to the two different groups. And we've been working a lot with Dr. Jallo because that was really causing her agita as well, saying, how can you be sure? Right. And so that is exactly when we got into this saying, okay, how do we prove you know exactly what's there? And so what we're looking for is some clearer reporting so that we can truly see, let's look at everything. Let's make sure we know and understand what types of things are not going through legal. And if they're not, let's make sure we have very specific parameters to say when it won't. But it's not like the system's not working, the system's working just fine. So it becomes a situation where do all contracts need to go? We had provisioned the system to send a certain type of contract to legal, but the question is really, is that going to make sense in this forum or is there another type? Unfortunately, the legal department, Will, I see your hand and I'll get to you in a second. Unfortunately, it was an understood thing that certain types of contracts, they felt as though the software renewals, the initial software contract would go through the legal department, but the others processed as renewals would generally not. And so, yes, it does pose a true risk because the question becomes, could it be assumed that it's a renewal and it doesn't need to go to legal when it in fact should have? So I guess at the board level or at some level, there would have to be some sort of very clear criteria, which is what I've asked for in the recommendation to state, tell me what you don't have to see and make sure that it's crystal clear what the criteria is that would make it something that is not due to hit your desk as a legal person versus something that isn't. So for example, if it's a one-pager and all we're doing is, yes, we're continuing, there's no change in rate, there's no change in terms, you're just saying I'm continuing for an additional year for the software, I can see the lesser risk there. I know the legal department noticed that The templates that they made were very, very straightforward, and those that were using them really were very consistent as far as like in facilities, if it's for snow plowing and it's a standard template or whatever the case is, there was a certain confidence or comfort as to some of those things not going through their department. Nevertheless, the reporting is going to give you the visibility necessary to say, what do we need to change in our procedures? If everything doesn't go through legal, what doesn't? And are we 100% confident the things that don't go through are not presenting a significant risk to the organization?
Right. I think it goes back though. So your observation 3 to monitoring, for me, those two kind of tied in, because the monitoring, and I highlighted this specific piece, that this could result in spending with a vendor over the contract threshold that would normally require independent quote, or put in the same paragraph, there's conversations around the RFP. And in another section that comes up again as well, that if we did this process, then are we now putting ourselves in a position where we're not doing an RFP and getting the best bang for our buck because we're doing these renewals in this way without a second set of eyes? I think for me as a board member, I would like legal to have eyes on all of these things. And I guess that's a conversation that we potentially need to have. And certainly I can bring it up in finance in terms of tying it back to the policy change. I definitely want us to change the policy. And I keep repeating this because I believe very strongly that it's something that we need to do. And it's nothing against our current superintendent, but when I think about policy changes, I think about long-term solutions to the district long before all of us are here. And I'm going to stop there because I know that there's another commissioner, so you can come back to me.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Powell. You're on mute, Commissioner Powell.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So when it comes to these, specifically like the software renewal contract, right? That someone made a decision it shouldn't go through legal. The problem with that, as I see it, is that with so many software packages that have that annual licensing and renewals attached to them, it's entirely possible with the passage of time that there are products out there that aren't being used anymore by anybody. And so if these aren't, I mean, legal may not be the right set of eyes, but when it comes to software licensing renewals, somebody ought to be putting a rubber stamp on it saying, yes, this is still necessary. It is not an obsolete product. And we know what, software products are improving or being superseded by other vendors all the time. Where a better product comes out, from a better vendor, and we might be buying the next generation and forget to pull the plug on the obsolete generation. So that's something, if everything went through legal and one of the check boxes said, it has a signature of someone who affirms that this product is still in use and is still necessary, then it might be beneath a lawyer's pay grade to assess that, but at least it's all going, through a standardized process, right? I don't care really what the process looks like, as long as we're paying attention to the fact that, yes, some software is not being used anymore and we should stop paying for it.
So generally, the software renewals are coming directly from the IT organization, so they would generally have some knowledge about the things. And I don't know all that is included, but if it was like an individual, say, software solution that I used in my department, I would be the person putting forward that recommendation for the renewal, not the IT department. So it would be something that's IT supported. So generally, I would anticipate, but couldn't guarantee, Those things are being put forward by the individuals who would be knowledgeable in that particular area as it related to some of the IT related items. I will also note that there is actually workflow, no matter what, within the system that we currently have. And it actually goes back to one of the comments that Commissioner LeBron had made. If a requisition goes forward, the person who's putting the requisition forward had to have gone through the budgeting process, potentially should have budgetary dollars in that process. Their supervisor would be aware, and it would roll up to, depending upon the dollars, possibly the actual chief that was involved. So there isn't an actual lack of visibility if it's within that reporting line. I think where the challenge comes in is, as you say, if you're dealing with IT supporting a product that is not something that's IT supported and it's some other functional area that would otherwise be responsible. But I do hear your point. Where do we get the documentation to certify or to confirm, is this truly still in use and is this still the best product? And as an add-on to Commissioner LeBron's statement, and if we've used the same product and we've renewed every year, how do we know we shouldn't be looking at it from a different point? But I'm not sure, and that would be only if we had, I'm not sure if Tim Schmant's on, but some items are considered more commodities and other things are considered professional services. And I know that he was kind of schooling me on what the special words I can include and what, when I'm talking about commodities versus not. So I would have to defer to them for those types of items. And I'm not sure all of the details, or even if someone along the lines of like the IT function, but I would believe, and my understanding is if it got budgeted, someone did anticipate the need for those particular items.
Okay.
I just want to just bring this point up. I don't know if you can see my screen, but the contract request reference guide, I tried to put it on the screen. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I just was trying to share, just in the spirit of what we were here, really trying to identify that when the contract requester puts this information there, we really are identifying by box all of the specific things that need to be included. It's meant to make things a little clearer, a little simpler for the user. And we want it to be really clear. Everything we want to do with everyone we want, every vendor that we love to use, doesn't mean they're a sole source. When we say sole source, it's rare. And I want to just remind folks that you really did grab a unicorn, and it is not, the person down the street that you really like to do business with. So we've identified really what the requester needs to do and really want it to be clear. One thing that we're emphasizing as it relates to money, and I'm sure Commissioner LeBron would love this piece, that if you need to make sure that the dollars better be funded before anything goes through for a contract. So I'm sure that's in her list of things to ask questions about, but I did want to make sure that you also included in the checklist. Oh, that only happens here. The other point is, as it relates to the supervisor, really being clear what we're expecting from the supervisor or the chief or the grant monitor in the case, to really be clear, what does that person do and what is that person accountable for? And so we really did try to specify for our purposes, if we list everyone's role and if we're clear on what every person does, everything that should happen will happen before we get to the point of an executed contract. And that's our hope. So I'm sorry for that. Let me jump back to you, Commissioner Powell. Did you have additional questions? You're on mute, Commissioner Powell.
I'm sorry. My next question is on this page, but I'm going to kick it back to Commissioner LeBron and let her ask her next question.
Okay, thank you. Anissa, just in observation 5, contract terms. I guess for me, my observation in here, from reading the observation plus the recommendations, is that why we as a district cannot have our own terms that identify payments and when a vendor will get paid versus accepting all of these different, I guess, payment schedules from different vendors, versus us having a standard to say, if you do business with us or contract with us, this is what you can expect as a vendor. We pay on the 15th of the month. We need this evidence of the work that you've completed. by this particular date in order to issue a check. And I don't know if that sounds abstract, but I know that in many organizations, that's essentially how they work. Here's our contract. If you do business with us, this is how we pay, and we need evidence that the work is being completed either month to month or every 3 months, you know. But I know that part of the issue that did occur from me asking you to look into that particular vendor was that some of the payment was like at the end of the year. And again, the workshops that occurred, but there was no way to backtrack evidence from a year ago around these workshops and how many people, parents and students have participated. So is there a reason why we could not, as a district, have a standardized payment implementation for vendors that also included collecting evidence that the work is performed?
So in our contract requests, we actually do require detailed information surrounding payments. And one of the items that we do include also is that we are requesting at least, if not monthly, but as the service is being performed. So we did lack previously the directive of, no, you don't get to bill me at the end of the year because now I can't prove anything that you did because no one's here even that you might have done business with. So that has actually now been dealt with in our contracts process to exactly do that, because we really don't want a surprise at the very end of the year. And it is too hard to manage that way. I mean, how many people can take their credit card bill and then just pay it at the end of the year, and you're going through months and months of data trying to figure out what happened. So that is now in our contracts, and that is a standard that we are expecting monthly bills or as services performed. Of course, that does change based upon some vendors might only be for one very short period of time. Let's look at our external auditor. They don't come in until, say, their prelim work is somewhere around May timeframe, and then they're gone again. So there might be a bill at the end of that prelim work, and that makes sense. And then they come back in for year end, and then they're doing this next period of time where they're doing it in September, and then there might be one final piece in December when the opinions are rendered. So we have to allow for the ability for, based upon how the work's performed, because there are going to be some that are going to be like that. We don't want a monthly bill because I'm not going to pay you before you do any work. So I certainly wouldn't pay them from January to May until I saw them show up and do some work. So we tried to put language inside of the contract to state monthly or as the services performed to allow for that. But yes, you are absolutely correct. We had an issue previously with someone issuing an annual bill, and good luck trying to figure out or prove that all those services did take place. So you're absolutely right about that.
I'm glad to hear that some changes were made to implement that piece. And then I guess my final observation in the totality of this audit, I think for me is really looking at the policy piece of this to see how the board can implement some of the recommendations through the lens of our policy as well. And I don't know if there'll be some opportunities to cross over, with the exception of the threshold amount, because again, I have an issue with the 35,000. But in that regard, I know that you mentioned some contracts for like snow plowing or digital services and software versus professional services, which could be a consultant that comes in either to the district or to a school. Is there a way, and maybe this already exists, but is there a way to separate that so that there is a process that's understood that, because I don't think that all three of those should be going necessarily through the same process. We have to do snow plowing in our buildings. That is a given. And there's a process that's almost automatic to get an RFP and make sure that we have the best price and the best quote. Whereas when I think of a consultant that's being hired, that has a little bit more free range. And so is there a way to separate those three items, I guess, or three areas, and understand that what the process is for each of those areas, but then also, I guess, the report back to the board? And I know that legal gives us our report of consultants and what we've paid, who made the request, how much that is. But is there a way to actually separate those three so that it's not all under the umbrella of professional service contracts? Because the reality is that when I think professional service contracts, I solely think consultants. but that's not the case. And so for me, there has to be a way to separate them, but I don't know. So.
Okay, so one of the things we are looking for is to try to have more complete reporting to really see what's there. The interesting thing about our process and our system, and as it works with our claims auditors, is in order for them to pay the bill, they need to say, is this invoice in compliance with the contract? So in the contracts module, that content is uploaded in our system. So it is supporting the invoices. So we are sure if we're paying according with terms or not. So there are different processes. So our procurement department would be responsible for things like the snow plowing, where we might have bid it out and it's going to move forward. And that would then be something that is approved through procurement for facilities. So they have involvement, but I gladly will provide the 3 processes or the processes that are there so that you guys can see what those differences are. And that's easy. But also, as it relates to a prior request, even from Dr. Jallo, providing a comprehensive list, what are all the contracts, and all should mean all, so we can determine and let her make the decision if she doesn't want to see it, but at least we should be able to say all and then know that everything's in there. Commissioner Powell?
Okay, so my concern, I brought this up before. I guess I'd like to hear a conversation between yourself and superintendent or any other person she wants to designate. But the vast number of grants that we get, that especially around school improvement, require a third-party vendor to do evaluations or assessments. And usually the amount is specified in the grant, how much is to be spent on that, and so on and so forth. But here's the thing, many of those grants are outside of the budget process. The grants are negotiated after the budget has been approved. And the board never sees these grants. We don't know anything about them until we get a resolution asking to enter into a contract or pay a particular service provider, right? And this inevitably creates something of a ruckus, because board members are saying, well, why this vendor? And you know, why was that vendor selected? And then we hear that they were specified in the grant application. So my concern is, are there other districts? Is there a practice in other districts besides our own to execute these submit these grant requests without the board being familiar at all with what's being forwarded, such that decisions decisions have already been made before the board is asked to essentially approve a contract? Do you see where my concern lies? It seems to me like other school districts, maybe they're smaller, whatever, but would approve a grant application before it's even submitted. And the argument that's always been presented to this board has been, we can't slow down the process. There might, you know, a grant might have a very short lead time, and we can't wait for the board to weigh in on whether that's an appropriate grant for us to be chasing. So there have never been any controls around that. And I really don't understand why not. Aside from the notion that it infringes on the administration's, you know, flexibility to apply for grants. Comments?
May I ask just a clarifying question? Sorry, the dog decided immediately to get on my lap. May I ask if, are you wanting to be involved in the grant application process? Is that the question? or is it after the grant is approved? You want to know what's in the grant and therefore have some feedback then. Is that what you're asking?
Well, after a grant's been approved, often choices have already been made, so they're late. On the other hand, I don't want the board to be the reason we miss a deadline in submitting a grant, right? But so the end result is we have no process, no controls in either of those circumstances, right? That doesn't seem like a normal process for an organization our size. It just doesn't. And I've raised this concern before. I don't know what the right process is. I don't know what other districts do, but this seems a little loosey-goosey for me.
I think, just given some of my previous experiences being in 3 different districts, the board hasn't been involved in the application process because in some instances, the turnaround time is very quick, right? Sometimes even, here in Rochester, we've received a call, hey, if you can submit so on and so forth, you meet all the criteria, and we've identified that. So we have a situation like that that's going on right now. I think what's helpful though, again, I'm still trying to understand, Commissioner Powell, what the kind of the root issue is. But I think what's important is that certainly when we've applied, we can update the board and say, hey, we've applied for the Today's Students, Tomorrow's Teacher grant. And we're looking to administer that at Edison. That it would more be like East because they have a TLI institute, right? But we'd be looking to have that happen at East Upper and Lower. Here are kind of the general things. That's something that we could include in a Friday letter. But I think frankly, if we kind of go back and forth, well, have you considered this? I mean, that's what we're here to do, is to make sure that we, that through under Dr. Morris's leadership and with Carrie Pecor and her team, that they're looking to see, what makes the best sense for matching. But we can certainly let you know that there are some things that are on what's on the horizon grant wise. But I mean, if there's an issue with our decision making or the choices, then we just need to have that conversation offline. But again, we also are working on making sure that we get things to you in ample time, so you don't feel like if there is a little bit of a back and forth. So that's something that's a process we continue to refine or hone. But I don't know. I guess I'm not sure what the issue is.
Okay. Well, if you look at the board meetings where the board has often had lengthy conversations about a particular service contract, or at any given school, and the answer will often be, well, the grant was written that way. The grant called for external evaluator, and that's who this person is. I think what rankles board members, and I don't mean me particularly, this is just an observation, right? What rankles many board members is that these are contracts that came into existence outside the budget process on a grant that we've never seen, right? That ultimately will reconcile with a budget amendment, but we're being asked often to approve a contract without context, right? Because of that issue of the grant, of the funding coming from the grant and the prescription on how to spend that grant money laid out in the grant.
So I can give you an example. So the SIG grant, right? The School Improvement Grant. When I was working stateside, because certain things were not able to happen in remote environment. That was a tongue twister for me. The time frame was extended under Jason Harmon's leadership. And so I worked on the memo with him to extend that time, and we talked through that, districts could use it for this, 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 and this. So that's a situation where districts hadn't originally planned for that to happen. We didn't know COVID was going to happen. And so districts, given they were now in this all remote environment, were creative of saying, hey, I could really use this particular service, or we could partner with this particular organization. So that's something that wasn't originally budgeted for in the 1920 school year. 1920 school year, but then districts said, yeah, we really could use this help for our students, for our teachers. I think maybe just initially what might be helpful is and I think I've been in the meeting where we did this, where we just kind of go over all the grants that we have, number one, but number two, if there are some new things on the horizon, that we can certainly either in the Friday letter or something like that, just say, hey, this is the Leslie Meyer Small Grant, and it is to provide leadership development for administrators. And, here's maybe what we're kind of thinking if we have some thoughts about that or things of that nature. But it's not typical that the board would get involved with the actual application down to that kind of piece. But we can certainly improve the notification, and I can work with Dr. Morris and Carrie Pecor to look at that. But
Dr. Jallo has a question.
I wonder if you're talking about federal grants, or are you talking about state grants? Like, are you talking about Title I or II or 4 or 3? Are you looking, because I think it's important that you know how that money is spent, because it's millions and millions and millions of dollars. And for you to not have knowledge of that money and how it's being spent, you have positions, you have programs, and I think it's important that the board, and the board has the right to ask, if you want it, you want it. But I think it's important for you to know, because for you to just look at the budgets that are created traditionally through your process and not look at the other monies that are coming in and out of that school, you don't get the full picture of the resources that are going to that school. So I don't know exactly if those are some of the grants that you're referring to, but I think it's important to have a really good knowledge around those grants and how those monies are being spent, especially since this board often speaks about equity and access.
Yes, Dr. Jallo, I'm really talking about anything that comes to us off cycle from the budget. If grants, multi-year grants that were awarded in a previous year, they work their way through the budget. That's not a problem. It's what comes into the current year budget after the budget was approved. And maybe, Madam Superintendent, maybe the answer lies in the information presented when we get a budget amendment request. Maybe the answer is greater detail at that time on the specific expense lines that were laid out in the contract, in the grant for the expense side. Instead of just this is the increase in revenues and the corresponding increase in expenses. If we had a table showing how much of those dollars went to this budget code and this budget code and this budget code, you could construct a detailed, updated budget with that kind of information. Would that be too burdensome at the time of the budget amendment to do that?
I'm looking to Dr. Morris because she would be the one
Yes, so we can go through the grants, particularly the federal grants. Sorry, dog again. We can go through the federal grants and we can talk about where and how the budgets are constructed for the grants. That way we can give you a picture of where some of these items or allocations are coming from. So it could be, for example, if you're looking for the Chromebooks and you're trying to find out where some of that funding is coming from, we can show that some might be actually allocated and coming from the general fund, but some might be coming from grants, and that might help give a bigger picture of what you're looking for. But also I hear you talking about some of the service providers that are discussed and allocated through the contracts that are allocated from grants. And I know that in my former role, in my former district, one of the things that we were trying to do was identify just that. So do we have the right group or right service provider providing that type of support? And so, for example, in external evaluations, it made us go back and look at some of the grant applications, particularly federal, but also looking at some of the state ones and making sure that where possible, if it was possible for us to do internal program evaluation or psychometrics, that we would build internal capacity. So we were able to actually do that and build that out for some of the grants that we knew we would regularly get, like some of the title grants and some of the school improvement grants that were state directed. And then that way we had our own capacity to do program evaluation and psychometrics where possible. But not all of the grants would allow us to do that. So when we had to do an external provider, we tried to look at what the criteria was from the federal government or wherever the grant source was. And a lot of times they have very stringent requirements for service providers that are identified in the grants. So that way, in order for you to get the grant, you would have to meet that specification and you would have to meet that criteria that's set. And frequently that's a very high criteria and high standard for service providers. So just keeping that in mind, that sometimes when possible, we would make sure that we would be able to internalize or build sustainability in district for some of those services, but also the criteria for a lot of those things were very high.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morse. You really pinpointed the nexus on where this conversation meets with our audit report on contracts. It's, you know, a lot of those grant dollars go to contracts, you know, and they come to the board's attention so late in the game that we often spend an inordinate amount of time in our meetings discussing them. Thank you so much for indulging me.
You're welcome.
So at a high level, we had 3 reports to take a look at. With those 3 reports, we had our building safety. I think the real issue is guidance and compliance. We had textbook management, and I think that is more an infrastructure and items that we really need to identify where the district needs to go. And then as it relates to contracts, there's a piece of compliance, but a lot of it is probably monitoring and ensuring that our contract process works. And one minor thing to add on this last item on contracts is really the fact that we really need a system to help the monitoring be not a manual process, because there are a lot of manual things that they are doing, and that's kind of a painful process to utilize as you're dealing with the throughput that is going on in that department. But that would be the 3 reports that I would like to discuss. And I will then go back to Commissioner Powell in case she wants to make a motion.
Yes, at this time, if there are no more questions, I'll give you one more chance for everyone to ask questions on any of the 3. If there are no more questions, I'd entertain a motion to advance this to the full board, these reports for approval at a regular scheduled business meeting.
So moved.
Oh, I saw Amy's hand. And I heard Van's voice. Van, would you be the second?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition. We'll call that unanimous. A 5-0 vote. I think that concludes the audit committee work. Is that right, Anissa? You're on mute.
Yes, that concludes our work. Again, I will be reaching out to the board members individually to determine how you would like to receive the CAFR. Normally, we spend a good amount of money to send out the 100 plus, probably around 125 page document to each of you. I don't know how much you enjoy the reading, but I'm not sure how many of you can either read that on screen or would like to print it for yourself. So I will be individually reaching out to you to get your preference on that delivery.
Digital, please.
Okay. So with that in mind, that will be coming to you probably in November. Usually it's around turkey time when the board is finishing up, but we do need to get ourselves ready for the beginning of December, the December 8th audit committee meeting with our external auditor, Fried Maxick. They will be going over the financial statements and their various opinions within the document. Again, my team, we will be reviewing the CAFR. We hope to get it sometime late this month. And we spend a couple weeks going through the CAFR, asking questions and looking throughout the references. And we will also then reach out and have both our questions answered as well as the board's questions answered so that we can make the December 8th meeting so that we're able to file in time for the state as of the first of the year. That would conclude my work for this.
Thank you, Anissa. Can you, sorry if this is bringing on you, but can you tell us what's in the pipeline for our next meeting aside from the CAFR and external audit?
So generally speaking, you know, in the pipeline, we do have some capital fixed asset type work that has to be done. So we've got like fixed asset, capital, H&K fund work that is going to be detailed that's there. And that is probably the biggest lift that we're going to have to be able to put inside the CAFR. We also have some payroll work. We did a lot of analysis when we first started with this COVID period, only because we weren't sure how long it was going to last. So we started doing some of our financial management work under our audit plan. Again, I told you that I'm probably not going to be able to do much with the school activity funds unless we see how the performance at the buildings is going to change. That may be something that we're not going to do this year. But then we would have to find a way to get assurance because unfortunately we are required to have an audit opinion. So we're going to have to come up with some limited procedures so that hopefully we can get through an audit opinion for next year's financial statements. But that will conclude my report.
Thank you. And to my colleagues, if you have any areas that you think we ought to be focusing on, and besides what you've already heard, feel free to send me a note. I'll compare that to the work plan and the risk assessment matrix that's already been employed and talk it over with Anissa, and we'll close the loop with, you know, with whoever makes that suggestion to let you know what we decide. Okay. If there are no other questions, I will throw the gavel off to Van for the resumption of our full board and
Are you going to
executive.
take credit for being early, Commissioner Powell?
Am I early? I'll take credit for anything.
Well done by everybody. Thank you very much. We have one additional matter that, as I indicated at the beginning of our meeting, that we would have to take under advisement in executive session. Is there any other business that any member of the board wants to discuss publicly? If not, then I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss a matter related to the employment of a particular school district employee. Is there a motion? Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. All those in favor of going to executive session indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Do we get enough ayes there, Madam Clerk?
Aye.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
So for those folks out there who are watching this board meeting, we are going to go into executive session to discuss matters that we're not allowed to discuss publicly. And I suspect that after we're done with that business, we will conclude our business in our board meeting and we'll all go home. So on behalf of the board, we wish everybody a safe and happy good evening.